To the people of God in Old Testament times, Egypt was both a friend and an enemy. The relationship between these two nations was like that of a pair of happy foes. Sometimes it was so good that they seemed almost inseparable, and sometimes they would turn against each other. Who were the key players in these situations? The pharaohs, the kings of Egypt. In the age of the oldest kingdom in Egypt, Pharaoh was simply used to refer to the royal palace of Egypt. In the 18th dynasty of the New Kingdom, Thutmose III regarded Pharaoh as a word of praise and began to use it in reference to the king. After the 22nd dynasty, it became the official title of the king of Egypt. God's people translated the word from its Egyptian pronunciation as Pharaoh. In the Old Testament, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is repeatedly mentioned, but they are not the same person. Pharaohs were the supreme rulers of ancient Egypt as well as autocratic kings who held the military, political, judicial, and religious powers of the whole country. Pharaoh even claimed to be the son of the sun god and the agent and incarnation of God on earth. When did the people of God first come into contact with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt? This can be traced back to the father of the children of Israel, Abram. According to Genesis 12, when Abram was 75 years old, the Lord called him from Haran to go into the promised land of Canaan. Abram's wife Sarai and his nephew Lot went with him. Shortly after they arrived in Canaan, they encountered a severe famine, and Abram went south to Egypt to escape the famine. Because of Sarai's beauty, Abram was afraid that the Egyptians would kill him to get to her. So he asked Sarai to say that she was his sister. As a result, and when the Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. That's according to Genesis chapter 12, verses 15 through 17. It was then that Pharaoh realized that Sarai was Abram's wife, and he quickly sent them away. But Pharaoh did not harm Abram, nor did he take back the livestock and servants he had given him. It was probably at this time that Hagar the Egyptian entered Abram's house and became Sarai's maidservant. Later, God changed the name of Abram to Abraham, and the name of Sarai to Sarah. When Abraham was 100 years old, God, as promised, caused Sarah to bear Isaac. When Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, who bore him twin sons, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob spent all his later years in Egypt. Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines and 12 sons. The 11th son, Joseph, was so favored by his father that it aroused the envy of his brothers. One day, the brothers got the chance and sold him, and Joseph was taken to Egypt as a slave. Because Joseph feared God, God made him the prime minister of Egypt after going through many trials. Later, during the severe famine throughout the land, Joseph took Jacob's whole family, about 70 people in size, to Egypt for refuge and safety. The Pharaoh at the time treated the Israelites kindly because of Joseph's great service to Egypt. It can be seen that the relationship between the early ancestors of God's people and the pharaohs, the kings of Egypt, was very good, and the pharaohs could be regarded as their benefactors. According to Exodus 1 and 2, after Joseph's death, the Pharaoh who did not know Joseph rose up. When he saw the Israelites had already grown to millions, he felt threatened, and he began to enslave them. Pharaoh even tried to kill and drown all the baby boys born to the Israelites. However, his wicked plan caused the baby Moses to become the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. When the people of God had lived in Egypt for 430 years, God heard their cry and sent Moses and Aaron to save them. The dialogue between Moses and Pharaoh is written down vividly in Exodus chapters 5 through 11. Pharaoh refused to let go of these cheap laborers, so God had to send 10 plagues. each more severe than the previous one, until the last plague of killing the firstborn, which forced the Pharaoh to let go. However, he later went back on his word. When the Israelites reached the edge of the Red Sea, Pharaoh and his army overtook them. God performed a miracle in time to part the Red Sea, allowing the Israelites to walk across the dry land at the bottom of the sea and reach the other side safely. Meanwhile, the entire army of Egypt, after chasing down into the Red Sea, was submerged by the returning water. The relationship between Pharaoh and the people of God at this time was probably the worst ever in history. After the Israelites established their country in the land of Canaan, during the initial unified kingdom period, especially during the reign of King Solomon, Israel was already a dominant power in the world, along with Egypt at the time. King Solomon also married the princess of Egypt and built a palace for her. During this period, the relationship between God's people and Pharaoh was probably the best it had ever been. After the death of King Solomon, the kingdom of Israel was divided into two. In general, the national power of the north and the south was not as strong as before, and Egypt was gradually eclipsed by the rising Assyria and Babylon. On the surface level, it seems that the northern kingdom of Israel was later destroyed by Assyria, and the southern kingdom of Judah by Babylon. But a close examination of the history books of the Old Testament will show Egypt had something to do with the fall of both kingdoms, because when these two were invaded by a foreign enemy, they would turn to Egypt, but Egypt in peril often failed to keep its promise. Regarding the last king of the northern kingdom, 2 Kings chapter 17 records, "But the king of Assyria discovered that Hoshea was a traitor, for he had sent envoys to So, king of Egypt, and he no longer paid tribute to the king of Assyria, as he had done year by year. Therefore Shalmaneser seized him and put him in prison. The king of Assyria invaded the entire land, marched against Samaria, and laid siege to it for 3 years." That's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 4 and 5. At last, the capital city of Samaria was conquered, and the northern kingdom perished. As for the southern kingdom of Judah, its last 3 kings were Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, and they were all bad kings who did evil. According to 2 Chronicles chapter 36, Necho, king of Egypt, interfered in the internal affairs of the southern kingdom, deposed King Jehoiazah, and set his brother Jehoiakim as king instead, thus setting the stage for the subjugation of the kingdom. However, all these powerful nations that had wronged God's people were later destroyed by God. Although Egypt was not destroyed, it was in decline. In fact, God had long foretold through his prophets how Egypt would rise and fall. In Ezekiel chapter 30, verse 6, it is written, "This is what the Lord says, the allies of Egypt will fall, and her proud strength will fail. From Migdol to Aswan, they will fall by the sword within her, declares the sovereign Lord." We see from the acts of Egypt and the house of Pharaoh that the true God we worship is the sovereign Lord over all nations and people. No nation or person who does not fear the true God can escape his rule. And all the children of the true God are surely under his care and without the fear of the encroachment of their enemies. The important thing is, we must hold fast to our faith and not be shaken. As Revelation chapter 3, verse 11 says, "I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown."